500,000 years after Earth's destruction, humanity returns to strike back. The old woman sat in the center of the memorial hall, surrounded by children who had never seen a natural sky. Her name was Elder Kira, and she was 147 years old. In the dim blue light of the ship's eternal night cycle, she began to speak the words that every human child learned before they could walk. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful blue world called Earth. It floated in the darkness of space like a jewel. On this world, humanity was born. We learned to walk. We learned to build. We learned to dream. And then, 500,000 years ago, they came and took everything from us. The children listened with wide eyes. They had heard this story 1,000 times, but it never grew old. It was the story of their people. It was the story of why they existed. It was the story of why they would never stop fighting. 500,000 years ago, the Vorthon Empire had discovered Earth. They were ancient beings, creatures of energy and metal who had conquered 10,000 worlds across the galaxy. To them, humanity was nothing. They were insects. They were pests. They were an inconvenience that needed to be removed so that the Vorthon could harvest Earth's resources. The humans of that ancient time had tried to fight back. They had launched their primitive nuclear weapons at the Vorthon ships. They had sent their bravest soldiers into battle, but it was like throwing stones at a mountain. The Vorthon possessed technology that humans could not even understand. Their weapons could burn entire continents. Their shields could stop any attack. Their ships could travel between stars in the blink of an eye. The war lasted only 3 days. On the first day, the Vorthon destroyed every military base on Earth. On the second day, they burned every major city. On the third day, they cracked the planet open like an egg and harvested its core for the rare minerals inside. 8 billion humans died in those 3 days. 8 billion voices silenced forever. 8 billion dreams turned to ash. But humanity did not die completely. In the years before the attack, some humans had seen the signs. They had detected the Vorthon ships approaching from distant space. They knew that Earth could not be saved, so they built ships in secret. They gathered the best scientists, the strongest soldiers, the wisest teachers, and the youngest children. They loaded these ships with everything they could carry, including seeds and animals and books and art. And in the final hours before Earth's destruction, they launched into the darkness of space. 100 ships escaped. 100 arcs carrying the last hope of humanity. They scattered in every direction, running as fast and as far as they could. The Vorthon hunted them for years, destroying many ships and killing thousands more survivors. But some ships escaped. Some ships found hiding places in the vast emptiness between stars. And in those hiding places, humanity began to rebuild. The generations passed like waves on a shore. First came the generation of grief, the survivors who had watched their world burn. They spent their lives crying and mourning and wondering why they had been spared. Many of them wanted to die. Many of them did die, from broken hearts and shattered spirits. Then came the generation of survival. These were the children of the survivors, born on cold metal ships in the darkness of space. They learned to grow food in artificial gardens. They learned to recycle every drop of water and every breath of air. They learned to repair machines and build new ones. They learned that survival was not just about living. It was about refusing to disappear. Then came the generation of purpose. These were the grandchildren of the survivors, and they asked a question that changed everything. If humanity was going to survive, what was the point? Just to exist? Just to float through space forever, afraid and alone? That was not enough. They needed a reason to keep going. They needed a goal. And so they chose vengeance. The decision was not made lightly. The elders debated for years. Some said that revenge was foolish. The Vorthon were too powerful. Any attempt to fight them would only lead to humanity's complete extinction. Better to hide and survive, to wait until the Vorthon Empire eventually fell on its own. But others disagreed. They said that hiding was not living. They said that their ancestors had not sacrificed everything just so their descendants could cower in the darkness forever. They said that the Vorthon had taken something that could never be replaced, and that debt could only be paid in blood. In the end, the vote was close. But the choice was made. Humanity would not just survive. Humanity would prepare. Humanity would grow stronger. Humanity would wait for as long as necessary. And then humanity would return. The plan was called the Long Vengeance. It would take generations to complete, perhaps thousands of generations, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years. But that was acceptable. Humans had learned patience. They had learned to think in terms of centuries instead of years. They had learned that time was their greatest weapon. The first phase of the Long Vengeance was expansion. The surviving ships scattered even further across the galaxy, finding new hiding places in distant corners of space. They built stations inside dead planets. They hollowed out asteroids and turned them into fortresses. They created hidden bases in the spaces between stars where no one would ever think to look. The second phase was growth. Humanity needed numbers. They needed billions of soldiers, billions of workers, billions of minds working together toward a common goal. So they reproduced. They built generation ships that could hold millions of people. They developed artificial wombs that could produce thousands of children at a time. They created cloning facilities that could copy the best soldiers and scientists over and over again. The third phase was learning. Humanity needed technology that could match the Vorthon. They needed weapons that could pierce Vorthon shields. They needed ships that could outrun Vorthon hunters. They needed knowledge that the Vorthon did not possess. So they studied, they experimented, they failed and tried again. They built upon the knowledge of each generation, creating libraries that contained everything humanity had ever learned. The fourth phase was adaptation. Humanity needed to change. The universe was harsh and unforgiving, and the original human body was too fragile to survive in many environments. So they modified themselves. They created humans who could breathe different atmospheres. They created humans who could survive in extreme temperatures. They created humans who could live in zero gravity. They created humans who could interface directly with machines. Slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, humanity transformed into something new. They were still human in their hearts and minds. They still felt love and anger and hope. They still told stories about Earth and dreamed of blue skies. But their bodies were different. Their capabilities were different. They had become something that the Vorthon had never anticipated. They had become a weapon. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, the greatest warship humanity had ever built. It was 3 kilometers long, armed with weapons that could crack moons, and crewed by 50,000 of humanity's finest warriors. But the Vengeance was not alone. Behind it stretched a fleet of 10,000 ships, each one built for a single purpose. Today was the day. After 500,000 years of waiting, humanity was finally ready to strike back. Chen was not a normal human by ancient standards. Her body was enhanced with cybernetic implants that made her stronger and faster and smarter than any human who had lived on Earth. Her eyes could see in spectrums that ancient humans could not imagine. Her brain was connected to the ship's computer, allowing her to control weapons and sensors with her thoughts. She was 130 years old, but she looked like she was 30. "Status report," she said, and her voice echoed through the bridge. "All ships report ready, Admiral," said Commander Torres, her second in command. "The fleet is in position. The Vorthon do not know we are here." Chen nodded. They had spent decades preparing for this moment. They had studied the Vorthon Empire carefully, mapping their patrol routes and identifying their weaknesses. They knew that the Vorthon had grown complacent over the centuries. They had not faced a serious enemy in over 100,000 years. They believed that the galaxy belonged to them and that no one could challenge their power. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Begin the attack," Chen ordered. The fleet surged forward, 10,000 ships moving as one, their engines burning bright against the darkness of space. They headed toward the Vorthon colony world of Thessar Prime, a planet that held 3 billion Vorthon civilians and the largest military base in this sector. The Vorthon detected them too late. By the time their warning systems activated, human ships were already in weapons range. Chen watched through her enhanced vision as the first missiles launched, streaking toward the Vorthon defense platforms with terrible speed. The explosions lit up the void like new stars. This was not revenge, Chen thought. Revenge was too small a word. This was justice. This was payment for 8 billion lives. This was the answer to 500,000 years of hiding and waiting and planning. The Vorthon scrambled to respond. Their warships launched from the planet's surface, rising to meet the human fleet. They outnumbered the humans 3-1, and they possessed technology that had conquered countless worlds. In any normal battle, they would have crushed their enemies with ease. But this was not a normal battle. Human ships danced around Vorthon weapons fire with impossible grace. Human shields absorbed attacks that should have destroyed them. Human weapons cut through Vorthon armor like it was paper. The Vorthon commanders could not understand what was happening. These were supposed to be primitives. These were supposed to be the descendants of insects. How could they fight like this? They did not understand what 500,000 years of evolution and preparation could accomplish. Within 3 hours, the Vorthon fleet was destroyed. Every ship was reduced to floating debris. Every defense platform was silenced. The planet lay exposed before the human fleet, helpless and afraid. Chen looked at Thessar Prime through the main view screen. She knew that billions of Vorthon lived down there, civilians, families, children. They had nothing to do with the destruction of Earth. They had been born long after that ancient crime, but their ancestors had made a choice. Their ancestors had decided that humanity did not deserve to exist. Their ancestors had killed 8 billion innocent people without mercy or hesitation. And now, their descendants would pay the price. "Admiral," Torres said carefully, "what are your orders?" Chen was silent for a long moment. She thought about Earth. She thought about the survivors who had fled into darkness. She thought about the countless generations who had lived and died in exile, never knowing what a natural sunset looked like. Then she gave the order. "Burn it all." The fleet opened fire. Missiles and energy beams rained down on Thessar Prime, turning the surface into a sea of flame. Cities that had stood for millennia were reduced to ash. Mountains were flattened. Oceans were boiled away. By the time the bombardment ended, nothing remained but a scorched and lifeless rock. Chen felt no pleasure in the destruction, but she felt no guilt either. This was simply the first step in a long journey. The Vorthon Empire was vast, containing thousands of worlds and trillions of beings. Thessar Prime was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, similar attacks were happening simultaneously. Human fleets emerged from hiding places that the Vorthon had never discovered. They struck at military bases and supply lines and communication centers. They appeared out of nowhere, destroyed their targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The Vorthon Empire had not known true war in over 100,000 years. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy who refused to surrender. They had forgotten what it meant to fight against people who had nothing left to lose. They were about to remember. In the halls of the Vorthon High Council, panic was spreading. Reports were coming in from every corner of the Empire. Human ships everywhere, human attacks everywhere. How was this possible? The humans had been destroyed 500,000 years ago. They had been nothing but a minor footnote in Vorthon history. The Supreme Chancellor demanded answers, but no one had any to give. The intelligence agencies had detected no signs of human activity. The military had reported no unusual movements. It was as if an entire civilization had appeared out of thin air. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. Humanity had not appeared out of thin air. They had always been there, hiding in the shadows, watching and waiting. They had been patient. They had been careful. They had learned to be invisible. And now they were done hiding. Elder Kira finished her story, and the children sat in silence. They understood now why they existed. They understood the purpose that had been passed down through countless generations. They understood the weight of the long vengeance that rested on their shoulders. "We will never forget Earth," Kira said, her old voice strong despite her years. "We will never forget what was taken from us, and we will never stop fighting until the Vorthon Empire is nothing but ash and memory." The children nodded. They were young, but they knew their duty. One day they would take their place in the fleet. One day they would continue the fight that their ancestors had started. One day they would help to end the Vorthon forever. This was the legacy of humanity. This was why they had survived. This was why they would never give up. The long vengeance had begun. The war had been raging for 50 years, and the galaxy had never seen anything like it. Supreme Commander Marcus Kane stood in the war room of Station Omega, studying the holographic map that floated before him. The map showed the entire Vorthon Empire, with red dots marking human victories and blue dots marking remaining Vorthon strongholds. 50 years ago, the map had been almost entirely blue. Now nearly a third of it glowed red. Humanity was winning. Kane was 212 years old, ancient by the standards of old Earth, but still young for a modern human. His body had been modified and enhanced dozens of times over the decades. His original organic brain had been supplemented with quantum processors that allowed him to coordinate battles across thousands of light years. His physical form was more machine than flesh, but his heart still beat with human blood, and his dreams were still filled with images of a blue planet he had never seen. "Report from the 7th Fleet," said Lieutenant Commander Yuki, a young woman with silver hair and eyes that glowed faintly with cybernetic implants. "Admiral Okanjo has captured the Vorthon shipyard at Nexus 7. Enemy casualties exceed 2 million. Our losses are minimal." Kane nodded. Another victory, another step closer to the end. But he knew better than to celebrate too early. The Vorthon Empire was vast beyond imagination. Even after 50 years of constant warfare, humanity had only conquered a fraction of their territory. The hardest battles were still ahead. "What is the status of the Vorthon response?" he asked. Yuki's expression grew serious. "Intelligence reports indicate that the Vorthon High Council has finally unified under a single war leader. They have appointed Grand Marshal Zethrix to command all military operations. Zethrix is considered the greatest military mind the Vorthon have produced in 10,000 years. Kane had heard of Zethrix. The Vorthon commander had earned his reputation by crushing rebellions on dozens of worlds. He was ruthless and brilliant, and unlike most Vorthon leaders, he did not underestimate humanity. He understood that this war was different from anything the Empire had faced before. "Zethrix has declared total war," Yuki continued. "The Vorthon are mobilizing their entire population. Every factory is producing weapons. Every able body is being conscripted into military service. They are building a fleet larger than anything we have ever seen." Kane absorbed this information calmly. He had expected this. The Vorthon would not simply surrender their empire without a fight. They would throw everything they had at humanity, hoping to crush the rebellion through sheer numbers and overwhelming force. It was exactly what humanity had planned for. "Send word to all fleet commanders," Kane ordered. "Begin Operation Endless Night." Operation Endless Night was the second phase of the Long Vengeance. The first phase had been the initial strikes, designed to catch the Vorthan off guard and establish humanity's presence as a serious threat. The second phase was about changing the nature of the war entirely. Humanity could not win a war of attrition against the Vorthan. The Empire was simply too large, with too many resources and too many soldiers. If humanity tried to fight a conventional war, they would eventually be overwhelmed no matter how advanced their technology was. So they had decided not to fight a conventional war. Instead of attacking Vorthan military targets, human fleets began striking at something far more important. They attacked the infrastructure that held the Empire together. They destroyed fuel refineries that powered Vorthan ships. They bombed communication relays that connected different sectors of the Empire. They sabotaged transportation networks that moved goods and soldiers from one world to another. Within months, the Vorthan Empire began to fracture. Worlds that had once been connected by instant communication found themselves isolated and alone. Military commanders could not receive orders from their superiors. Supply ships could not find their destinations. Factories could not deliver weapons to the soldiers who needed them. The great machine of the Vorthan Empire was grinding to a halt, not because of military defeats, but because it simply could not function anymore. Grand Marshal Zethrix recognized the threat immediately. He ordered his fleets to protect the remaining infrastructure at all costs. But humanity had anticipated this response. They had developed new weapons specifically designed for this phase of the war. The ghost ships were among humanity's greatest technological achievements. They were small vessels, barely larger than fighter craft, but they possessed stealth systems that made them completely invisible to Vorthan sensors. They could slip past any defense, enter any system, and strike at any target without being detected. Thousands of ghost ships spread throughout the Empire, each one carrying enough explosives to destroy a space station or cripple a planet's power grid. The Vorthan could not defend against them because they could not see them. Every time they thought they had secured a vital installation, another explosion would tear it apart. The psychological impact was devastating. Vorthan civilians began to panic. They had never experienced warfare like this. They had never felt unsafe in their own homes. For 100,000 years, they had been the rulers of the galaxy, feared and respected by all other species. Now they were being hunted in their own territory by an enemy they could not find. Some Vorthan worlds began to surrender. Their leaders decided that continuing the war was pointless. Better to accept human rule than to die in a conflict that could not be won. Other worlds declared independence from the Empire, hoping that if they were no longer part of the enemy, humanity would leave them alone. But not all Vorthan were willing to give up. Zethrix gathered the most loyal and dedicated soldiers he could find. He formed them into elite units called the Purifiers, warriors who were willing to die for the glory of the Empire. These soldiers were subjected to extreme modifications, making them stronger and faster and more deadly than any Vorthan who had come before. The Purifiers launched counterattacks against human positions with fanatical determination. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. They fought until they were destroyed, taking as many humans as possible with them. Captain Sarah Wells knew the Purifiers well. She had fought against them in 7 different battles, and she had lost friends and comrades to their relentless attacks. But she had also killed hundreds of them, watching through her rifle scope as their bodies fell. Wells was a sniper, one of the best in the human military. Her enhanced eyes could spot a target from 10 kilometers away. Her modified nervous system allowed her to remain perfectly still for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. Her cybernetic hands never trembled, no matter how long she held her weapon. Today, she was on the Vorthan world of Kethros, leading a team of Special Forces soldiers on a mission to eliminate a Purifier command center. Intelligence had identified the location where Zethrix's elite warriors received their orders. If humanity could destroy this center, it would cripple Purifier operations across an entire sector. Wells and her team had infiltrated the planet 3 days ago, traveling through enemy territory using stolen Vorthan vehicles and forged identification documents. They had avoided patrols and slipped past checkpoints, getting closer and closer to their target. Now they were in position, hidden in the ruins of a destroyed building just 200 meters from the command center. Wells looked through her scope, studying the Vorthan soldiers who guarded the entrance. "I count 40 hostiles," she whispered into her communicator. "Heavy weapons emplacements on the roof, energy shields protecting the main entrance." "Understood," replied Sergeant Chen, her second in command. "What is the plan?" Wells considered their options. A direct assault would be suicide. Even with their advanced weapons and enhanced abilities, her team of 12 soldiers could not defeat 40 purifiers in open combat. They needed a different approach. "We create a distraction," Wells decided. "Martinez, set up the decoy drones on the eastern perimeter. When I give the signal, activate them. The Vorthan will think we are attacking from that direction. While they are responding, the rest of us will hit the western wall." Martinez nodded and slipped away into the darkness. Wells watched him go, then turned her attention back to the command center. She could feel her heart beating steadily in her chest. After all these years of fighting, she should have been used to combat. But the fear never completely disappeared. It just became something she could control. 20 minutes later, Martinez reported that the decoys were in position. Wells took a deep breath and gave the signal. The eastern side of the command center erupted in explosions and weapons fire. The decoy drones were programmed to simulate a full-scale infantry assault, firing weapons and making noise and drawing attention. The Vorthan guards immediately responded, rushing toward the apparent threat. "Now!" Wells commanded. Her team moved with practiced precision. They crossed the open ground in seconds, their enhanced muscles carrying them faster than any ancient human could have run. They reached the western wall just as the first guards realized the attack was a diversion. Wells fired her rifle, the plasma bolt punching through a Vorthan soldier's skull before he could raise his weapon. Her teammates opened fire as well, cutting down 4 more guards in the space of a heartbeat. Then they were inside. The interior of the command center was a maze of corridors and chambers filled with Vorthan technicians and officers. Wells did not hesitate. She had no mercy for these creatures. Their ancestors had destroyed Earth. Their people had hunted humanity for 500,000 years. Every Vorthan she killed was payment for crimes that could never be fully repaid. Her team fought through the building, room by room, clearing each area before moving on. The Vorthan fought back desperately, but they were not prepared for this kind of assault. Human soldiers were faster and stronger than anything they had faced before. Human weapons cut through Vorthan armor like it was nothing. Finally, Wells reached the central command room. She kicked open the door and found herself face to face with a purifier commander, a massive Vorthan warrior covered in scars and medals. The purifier moved with surprising speed, drawing a blade and lunging at Wells. She dodged the attack and fired her rifle, but the purifier's armor absorbed the shot. He swung his blade again, forcing her backward. "Human insect," the purifier growled in accented English. "You think you can defeat us? We are eternal. We are infinite. Your kind is nothing but a temporary annoyance." Wells did not waste breath on a response. She dropped her rifle and drew her own blade, a monomolecular sword that could cut through any known material. The purifier attacked again, and she met his blade with her own. They fought in silence, their weapons clashing in a deadly dance. The purifier was strong, but Wells was faster. She ducked under his swing and drove her blade into the gap between his armor plates. The sword slid through his body and emerged from his back. The purifier stumbled, but he did not fall. He grabbed Wells by the throat and lifted her off the ground, squeezing with crushing force. "We killed your world," he rasped, even as his life faded away. "We will kill you all." Wells felt her vision darkening as the purifier's grip tightened. But she did not panic. She reached up with her cybernetic hand and pressed her fingers against the Vorthon's eyes. Then she activated the plasma cutter built into her palm. The purifier screamed and released her. He fell to the ground, dead before he hit the floor. Wells stood over his body, breathing heavily. Her throat was bruised and her muscles ached, but she was alive. She activated her communicator. "Command center secure," she reported. "All hostiles eliminated." Back on Station Omega, Supreme Commander Kane received the news with satisfaction. Another victory, another step forward. But he knew that the war was far from over. Zethrix was still out there, still commanding billions of loyal soldiers. The Vorthan Empire was wounded, but it was not dead. And Kane had received troubling intelligence reports. The Vorthan were working on something new, something they called the Purification Protocol. Details were scarce, but the little information humanity had gathered suggested it was a weapon of unprecedented destructive power, a weapon that could potentially turn the tide of the war. Kane called a meeting of his senior commanders. They gathered in the war room, their holographic projections flickering in the dim light. There was Admiral Chen, who had commanded the first attack 50 years ago. There was General Okonjo, who had captured dozens of Vorthon worlds. There was Director Wu, who led humanity's intelligence operations. "The Vorthon are desperate," Kane began. "They know they are losing this war. They know that conventional tactics cannot defeat us. So they are developing something new, something terrible." He activated the main display, showing the limited information they had gathered about the purification protocol. Images of massive facilities, records of strange energy signatures, reports from spies who had disappeared after sending their final transmissions. "We believe the purification protocol is a weapon capable of destroying entire solar systems," Kane continued. "The Vorthan plan to use it against our hidden bases, our fleet staging areas, perhaps even against Earth's original location as a symbolic gesture." The commanders absorbed this information in silence. A weapon that could destroy solar systems was beyond anything humanity had developed. If the Vorthan completed this project, all of humanity's victories would mean nothing. "We cannot allow this weapon to be completed," Kane said. "I am authorizing Operation Shadowfall, a direct assault on the facility where the purification protocol is being developed. This will be the largest military operation in human history. We will commit everything we have." Admiral Chen spoke up. "If we commit our entire force, we leave ourselves vulnerable. The Vorthon could launch counterattacks against our undefended positions." "I know," Kane replied, "but we have no choice. If the purification protocol is completed, we will not have any positions left to defend. This is the decisive moment of the war. Everything we have worked for over 500,000 years comes down to this." The commanders nodded. They understood the stakes, they understood the risks, and they understood that there was no alternative. Operation Shadowfall would begin in 30 days. Across the galaxy, billions of humans began preparing for the battle that would determine the fate of their species. Soldiers checked their weapons and said goodbye to their families. Engineers worked around the clock to repair damaged ships and build new ones. Scientists rushed to complete projects that might give humanity an edge in the coming fight. On a small transport ship traveling through empty space, Elder Kira sat with a group of young soldiers. They were heading to the front lines to join the fleet that would assault the Vorthon weapon facility. Many of them would not survive. They knew this. They accepted this. Kira looked at their young faces and remembered all the generations that had come before. All the people who had lived and died in exile, keeping the dream of revenge alive. All the sacrifices that had been made so that this moment could arrive. "You are the children of Earth," she told them. "You carry within you the spirit of 8 billion people who died so that you could live. You are their legacy. You are their vengeance. Whatever happens in the battle ahead, remember that you are fighting for something greater than yourselves. You are fighting for the memory of a world that should never have been destroyed. The young soldiers listened, and in their hearts, they felt the weight of 500,000 years pressing down upon them. They were afraid. They were determined. They were ready. The final battle was approaching, and humanity would face it together. The fleet emerged from hyperspace like an avalanche of steel and fire. 15,000 warships materialized around the Vorthon system of Zerath, their hulls gleaming in the light of a dying red star. At the center of the system floated a massive space station, larger than any structure humanity had ever built. This was the Forge of Purification, the facility where the Vorthon were constructing their ultimate weapon. Supreme Commander Kane watched from the bridge of his flagship, the Reckoning. He could see the station through the main view screen, a twisted mass of metal and energy that pulsed with strange light. Around it orbited the largest Vorthon fleet ever assembled. Nearly 20,000 ships gathered to protect the Empire's last hope. "All ships report ready," said Lieutenant Commander Yuki. "Weapons charged, shields at maximum, awaiting your orders." Kane took a deep breath. This was the moment. After 500,000 years, the fate of humanity and the Vorthon Empire would be decided in the next few hours. Billions of lives hung in the balance. There was no room for hesitation or doubt. "Begin the attack," he ordered. The human fleet surged forward, engines burning at maximum power. The Vorthon responded immediately, their ships moving to intercept the incoming threat. The two fleets collided in the space between, and the largest naval battle in galactic history began. Plasma bolts and missiles filled the void, creating a storm of destruction that stretched across millions of kilometers. Ships on both sides exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Debris scattered in every direction, forming deadly clouds that threatened any vessel that passed too close. Kane watched the battle unfold through his enhanced senses, processing information from thousands of sources simultaneously. He could see every ship in both fleets, tracking their movements and predicting their actions. His quantum-enhanced mind calculated trajectories and probabilities faster than any computer, allowing him to coordinate his forces with impossible precision. But even with all his advantages, Kane could see that the battle was not going well. The Vorthon had known they were coming. They had prepared their defenses carefully, creating kill zones that trapped human ships and destroyed them with concentrated fire. For every Vorthon vessel that fell, 2 human ships were lost. "We are taking heavy casualties," Yuki reported, her voice tight with concern. "At this rate, we will not reach the station." Kane had expected this. The Vorthon would not give up their weapon without a fight. They would sacrifice every ship and every soldier to protect the Forge of Purification. But Kane had planned for this scenario. He had not brought his entire fleet just to attack. He had brought it to create an opportunity. "Signal Captain Wells," he ordered. "Tell her it is time." On the other side of the system, hidden behind a cloud of debris, Captain Sarah Wells received the message. She stood on the bridge of a small stealth cruiser surrounded by the best Special Forces soldiers in the human military. Their mission was simple, but incredibly dangerous. While the main fleet kept the Vorthon occupied, Wells and her team would infiltrate the Forge of Purification and destroy it from within. "We have our orders," Wells announced to her team. "Let us finish what our ancestors started 500,000 years ago." The stealth cruiser moved forward, its advanced cloaking systems rendering it invisible to Vorthon sensors. They slipped past the raging battle, avoiding the areas of heaviest fighting, and approached the station from its blind side. As they drew closer, Wells could see the forge in detail for the first time. It was enormous beyond imagination. A structure that could have housed millions of people. Energy conduits ran across its surface like veins, carrying power to the weapon systems within. Defensive turrets bristled from every surface, ready to destroy any unauthorized vessel that approached. "I am detecting a docking port on the lower section," said Lieutenant Martinez, studying his scanner. "It appears to be lightly defended. We can enter there." Wells nodded. "Take us in." The cruiser descended toward the docking port, moving slowly to avoid detection. For a terrible moment, Wells thought they had been spotted. A nearby turret swiveled in their direction, its sensors scanning the area. But then it turned away, finding nothing. They docked without incident. The airlock opened, and Wells led her team into the station. The interior of the forge was like nothing Wells had ever seen. The corridors were enormous, designed for beings much larger than humans. Strange machines lined the walls, humming with energy that made Wells's modified bones vibrate. The air itself felt wrong, charged with power that seemed to press against her skin. "Stay alert," she whispered. "We do not know what we will find in here." They moved through the station in practiced formation, weapons ready for any threat. They encountered patrols of Vorthon guards, but they were able to avoid or eliminate them without raising an alarm. The station was so large that it was impossible to guard every corridor. The Vorthon had concentrated their forces at key choke points, leaving gaps that trained infiltrators could exploit. After an hour of careful movement, Wells and her team reached the heart of the station. They emerged onto a catwalk overlooking a massive chamber, and what they saw made them stop in their tracks. The purification weapon was nearly complete. It was a sphere of pure energy, contained within a framework of crystalline structures that pulsed with terrible power. Wells could feel the heat radiating from it even from this distance. She could sense the raw destructive potential waiting to be unleashed. "By the ancestors," Martinez breathed. "It is even worse than we thought." Wells agreed. The weapon was larger and more powerful than their intelligence had suggested. If the Vorthon managed to deploy it, they could destroy human civilization with a single strike. Every hidden base, every fleet, every colony they had built over 500,000 years would be vaporized in an instant. "We need to destroy it now," Wells said. "Set the charges." Her team spread out, placing explosive devices at key structural points around the chamber. They worked quickly but carefully, knowing that one mistake could alert the Vorthon to their presence. Wells kept watch, her rifle aimed at the entrances to the chamber, ready to deal with any guards who appeared. Then she heard a voice behind her. "I knew you would come." Wells spun around and found herself facing Grand Marshal Zethrix himself. He was the largest Vorthon she had ever seen, towering over her by nearly 2 meters. His body was covered in battle scars and cybernetic implants. His eyes glowed with cold intelligence. "You humans are predictable," Zethrix continued. "Your attacks, your strategies, your weaknesses. I have studied your kind for 50 years. I know how you think. I knew you would try to infiltrate the forge while your fleet provided a distraction." Wells did not respond. She simply raised her rifle and fired. Zethrix moved with impossible speed for a creature his size. He dodged the plasma bolt and lunged forward, his massive hand closing around Wells's weapon and crushing it like paper. Then he grabbed her by the throat, just as the Purifier commander had done years ago. "Your species is remarkable," Zethrix admitted, holding Wells off the ground as if she weighed nothing. "You survived our purge. You hid for 500,000 years. You developed technology that rivals our own. In another universe, we might have been allies." Wells struggled against his grip. But even her enhanced strength was nothing compared to his. She activated every weapon built into her body, plasma cutters and energy blades and explosive projectiles, but Zethrix's armor absorbed them all. "But this universe only has room for one dominant species," Zethrix continued, "and it will not be yours." Behind Wells, her team had finished setting the explosives. They raised their weapons, ready to fight the Vorthon commander. But they hesitated, knowing that if they fired, they might hit their captain. That moment of hesitation was all Wells needed. She reached into the pouch at her belt and pulled out a small device. It was a neural disruptor designed to overload the nervous system of any organic being. It was a last resort weapon, because using it at this range would affect Wells as well. "It does not matter if I die," she said, looking directly into Zethrix's eyes. "It does not matter if all of us die, because we have already won." She activated the disruptor. Pain exploded through Wells's body, every nerve screaming in agony. But she saw Zethrix suffer the same fate, his massive form convulsing as the disruptor tore through his neural implants. His grip loosened, and Wells fell to the ground. "Now," she gasped, "detonate the charges." Martinez did not hesitate. He pressed the button. The explosions tore through the chamber, destroying the crystalline framework that contained the purification weapon. Without the framework, the energy sphere became unstable. It began to collapse in on itself, releasing waves of power that tore through the station. Wells watched as reality seemed to twist around the dying weapon. She knew she would not survive. The energy release would vaporize everything within kilometers. But she did not feel fear. She felt peace. She had done what she was born to do. She had completed the mission that her ancestors had begun 500,000 years ago. The purification weapon collapsed completely, and the forge of purification disappeared in a flash of light, visible from every corner of the system. On the bridge of the reckoning, Kane witnessed the destruction. For a moment, he felt nothing but grief for the soldiers who had sacrificed themselves. Captain Wells and her team were gone, vaporized along with the station. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. The Vorthon fleet faltered. Their commanders had witnessed the destruction of their ultimate weapon. They had seen their hope disappear in a single instant. Some ships continued to fight, but others broke formation and fled. The perfect coordination of the Vorthon defense collapsed into chaos. "All ships," Kane ordered, his voice hard with determination. "Press the attack! Show them no mercy!" The human fleet surged forward with renewed energy. They tore through the disorganized Vorthon lines, destroying ships by the hundreds. The tide of the battle turned completely in a matter of minutes. By the time the fighting ended, the Vorthon fleet had been annihilated. 10,000 of their ships were destroyed or disabled. Grand Marshal Zethrix was dead. The forge of purification was nothing but expanding debris. Kane looked at the wreckage floating through space, and for the first time in his long life, he allowed himself to feel hope. The Vorthon Empire would not recover from this defeat. They had lost their weapon, their leader, and their largest fleet. Across the galaxy, the remaining Vorthon forces would soon realize that the war was over. Humanity had won. The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On every human world, in every hidden base, on every ship and station, people celebrated. They cried and laughed and embraced each other. They had waited 500,000 years for this moment. Their ancestors had dreamed of it. Their parents had fought for it. And now it had finally arrived. The Vorthon Empire did not fall immediately. It took another decade for the last pockets of resistance to be eliminated. But the outcome was never in doubt. Humanity pressed forward relentlessly, conquering world after world, system after system. The Vorthon who surrendered were allowed to live, confined to reservations on remote worlds where they could no longer threaten anyone. Those who continued to fight were destroyed without mercy. 10 years after the Battle of Zerath, Supreme Commander Kane stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched as the last Vorthon warship was destroyed. It was a small vessel, crewed by fanatics who had refused to surrender. They had fought bravely, but they never had a chance. "It is done," Yuki said quietly. "The Vorthon Empire is finished." Kane nodded slowly. He felt exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. He had been fighting for over 60 years. He had watched countless friends die. He had ordered attacks that killed billions, and now it was over. But what came next? That question consumed human civilization in the years that followed. For 500,000 years, their entire purpose had been revenge. Every decision, every action, every thought had been focused on destroying the Vorthon. Now that the Vorthon were gone, humanity needed a new purpose. Some argued that humanity should simply rest. They had earned it. They had suffered enough. They should enjoy their victory and build peaceful lives on the worlds they had conquered. Others disagreed. They pointed out that the universe was vast and full of dangers. The Vorthon had been just one threat among many. There were other empires out there, other civilizations that might one day decide that humanity was a threat to be eliminated. If humanity wanted to survive, they needed to keep growing stronger. The debate continued for decades with no clear resolution. But then something happened that changed everything. Human explorers, pushing into unexplored regions of space, discovered something remarkable. In a distant corner of the galaxy, orbiting a young yellow star, they found a world that looked eerily familiar. A world with blue oceans and white clouds and green continents. A world that was almost exactly like the planet their ancestors had lost so long ago. They named it New Earth. Word of the discovery spread throughout human civilization like wildfire. People who had never seen a natural sky wept at the images of blue oceans and green forests. Children who had grown up on metal ships and artificial stations dreamed of running through open fields under an alien sun. The colonization of New Earth began immediately. Millions of humans made the journey, eager to experience what their ancestors had lost. They built cities on the shores of alien oceans. They planted crops in soil that had never known human hands. They raised children who would grow up knowing the feel of rain on their faces and the warmth of sunlight on their skin. Elder Kira lived long enough to walk on New Earth. She was over 200 years old by then, kept alive by the same technology that allowed humanity to survive in the depths of space. She stood on a hill overlooking a valley filled with human settlements, and she cried. "We did it," she whispered to the wind. "After everything, we found our way home." She died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her descendants. She was buried in the soil of New Earth, the first of many humans who would rest in this new paradise. In the centuries that followed, humanity continued to expand. They colonized hundreds of worlds, building a civilization that dwarfed the Vorthon Empire at its height. They encountered other species, some friendly and some hostile. They faced new challenges and new threats, but they faced them together, united by the memory of what they had lost and what they had gained. On New Earth, in a memorial hall that looked remarkably like the one that had existed on the old ships, elders continued to tell the story to children. They spoke of Earth and its destruction. They spoke of the long exile and the burning desire for revenge. They spoke of the war and the sacrifices and the final victory. And they spoke of what the journey had taught humanity. That survival was not enough. That revenge was not enough. That true victory came not from destroying your enemies, but from building something worth protecting. 500,000 years after the destruction of Earth, humanity had returned. They had struck back against those who had wronged them. They had proven that they could not be exterminated, could not be forgotten, could not be dismissed. But more importantly, they had found a new purpose. Not revenge, but creation. Not destruction, but growth. Not hatred, but hope. The children listened to the stories with wonder in their eyes. They knew they were part of something greater than themselves. They knew they carried the legacy of countless generations who had fought and died so that they could live. And as they looked up at the stars, they did not see threats or enemies or dangers. They saw possibilities. They saw futures waiting to be explored. They saw the infinite potential of a universe that was finally theirs to discover. Humanity had survived the darkness. Humanity had conquered its enemies. And now, humanity would reach for the stars. The long vengeance was complete. But the story of humanity was just beginning.